Welcome to the Piece of Me podcast. This is your space for all things peace, positivity, and finding balance to live your best life. Life gets busy, and at times it's messy. I'm here to help you clean things up and put peace back in its place. I'll share tips, ideas, interviews, mindset shifts, and fresh perspectives to help you along the way. If you've been listening to this show for some time, then you've heard me talk about how much I love my iced coffee. I drink it year-round and rotate the creamer flavors to keep it fun. In the summer, I would switch between coconut cream and French vanilla. But now that we're shifting seasons, I'll pull cinnamon roll and pumpkin spice out of the archives and into the mix. Once my iced coffee is just the way I like it, I'll add a Java sock sleeve to keep it colder for longer. Think coffee koozie. These sleeves keep my cup from sweating and making a total mess. Plus, Java socks add a touch of your personality to your cup. Because I love iced coffee so much, I want to give a handful of lucky listeners a free coffee on me. I've partnered with Java Sock to include a pink tie-dye coffee sock with this giveaway. I love the color combination. The pink tie-dye is giving total Barbie vibes. To see the sock, get the contest rules, and for your chance to win, head on over to the Piece of Me podcast Instagram page. I'll also link my Instagram page in the show notes of this episode below so you can have a chance to get a coffee on me. Hi friends, it's Lexy Leigh. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new, then welcome back and thanks for coming back to the podcast. It feels great to be in the swing of season 2 and connecting with all of you again. Now, before I tell you about today's guest, I'm going to ask you for a simple favor. Hit the follow button on the top of this podcast page to let me know you're out there and to help support the show. And if you've got 30 seconds at the end of this episode, please leave me a positive rating and review. Now, today's guest is Stefan Glazer. He's an entrepreneur, podcast host, and now the author of the book, Tools for Navigating Neurodivergence. Neurodivergence, an interesting word that I didn't really understand until I talked to him. Now, what I love about my conversation with Stefan is his openness to talk about what this big word means, his own personal diagnosis with ADHD and anxiety, how his book can help you, and much more. We also dive into why it's so hard to make friends in our 30s and 40s, and meditation, finding a therapist, and energy matching, to name a few. Now, Stefan and I go way back, and he's the one who actually gave me the push that I needed to start this podcast. So this episode just felt like an easy conversation with a friend. Now, after we stopped recording, we continued to talk for another 40 minutes about life. I'll list all of Stefan's information in the show notes below so you can pick up his new book, connect, or listen to him on his podcast. Let's take a listen. Stefan, welcome to the Piece of Me podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a while since I've actually been able to see you and hear from you.
It has been a while. I know it's been too long, but here we are.
Yes.
And life has changed quite a bit since we last connected.
Yes. It is a completely different world we live in now.
It is.
It's not the radio world anymore.
No, it's not. It's not the radio world. And one of the things I actually shared in my introduction for you was that thankfully you were the one that gave me the nudge to get my podcast off the ground. So to my listeners, this is the guy that helped me take the risk. And he actually took a risk too, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Yes. Yeah. I always tell people when you have something to say and you're afraid to say it, just say it. So you're on the fence with the podcast, not sure, like, what should I do? And I said, just do it.
Yep, you did. You said, just do it. Get going. That's all I needed to hear. And then all of a sudden I was sending you lots of emails and asking lots of questions, and you were just so wonderful to help me and support me. So I appreciate you very, very much. It's nice to have you here.
Like I said, it is my pleasure. So I'm excited to chat with you, obviously, not just because of our history, but also because there's a lot of good stuff to chat about.
Yeah. And we're actually going to be talking about a book that you wrote and published, which is a big deal. But yes. Actually, why don't we start with just tell us a little bit about yourself first before we get into all the good stuff.
Yeah. So I was actually in my life before being an author. I am a photographer. I'm a professional photographer. I'm a published photographer as well. But before all that, I was just kind of meandering through life with a little hidden mental illness that a lot of people seem to not know about, but shows up some from time to time. And, ADHD was my hidden superpower, as I like to call it now. I was diagnosed at 39, and that was kind of the catalyst that changed my life. Because before 39, everything was very confusing, very hard. There was a lot of struggle, a lot of frustration in everything I did, from web design to graphic design. Even when I started my photography business, it was not easy, and I had to figure out how to get through everything. So I put things in place to kind of help me get through and help me navigate the constant minefields of my own brain. So that led me to not writing a book. That was not on the table at all. That just led to me figuring out how to make life easier for myself. And as my curiosity grew for okay, why does my brain work the way it does? What is this whole world of neurodiversity and neurodivergence? What is this? What am I doing, and what can I do to help alleviate the pressure? That's when I started seeing I had a lot of little tools that I was doing to mitigate some of the frustrations. And I started expanding on it. And that's kind of what got me into getting into support groups first, talking about it openly, which not a lot of people do. They're generally very ashamed when it comes to things like that. And eventually writing a book on accident.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
A lot of people say they're going to write a book, but few very actually do it. So
yeah, I when it came to writing a book, it started as just a lot of information that came one night. Sometimes I just journal or do little things where I'm trying to get information on a Word document. I load up Google Docs and I'll just type out whatever's in there in my head, just let it pour onto the page. And then one night I just kind of went full on and I started typing, and it didn't stop. And I had over 20 pages of written text. I was kind of shocked because it was a wall of text. But I had a business coach who is also an author. And as I was kind of going over the information that I had, she looked at me and said, you have the starting of many different books here. And what it was is I was writing out all the things I was able to overcome in my life and how I overcame them. And that was the start of my book, Tools for Navigating Neurodivergence. That was my whole outline became, well, yeah, let's take these tools and bring them to the masses and bring them to make it easy to understand, easy to follow, and make it so people that are neurodivergent, that have, ADHD, OCD, there's a huge umbrella that comes under the neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So I want to make it so they can absorb this information and move forward. And that's when it really started. And that was only 7 months ago now.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So I have a few questions, and I'm taking notes as you're speaking. What made you said you were diagnosed at 39.
Yeah.
Was there something going on where you're like, okay, I just don't feel right, and I need to talk, I need to just kind of I don't know, something needs to be confirmed with this? How did it get to that point?
That was luckily and unluckily, I was in the midst of basically a nervous breakdown. I couldn't understand why I couldn't remember things, why I couldn't. And it's something that plagued me all my life, but it was getting to the point where I was forgetting so many little things. I was forgetting how to do things. I was misremembering things. And then somebody would tell me something and I would forget half of it if I didn't write it down. And I'm like, what is going on? And my mood swings and this, like, the regulation of my emotions was out of control. Like, I would go 0 to 100 all the time. Like, oh, great. Like, this person hates me. Like, my wife could even say a very simple thing to me or ask me a simple question and I would break down. And it got to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I need to find out if there's something going on. And that's when I started by just going to my doctor and saying, hey, what's going on? Like, there's so much going on. I don't know if it's just depression or if I'm just, something's wrong and he referred me to a psychiatrist where I had to take a lot of tests, which are very fun when you have, eventually I come to find out I have severe inattentive ADHD, and also generalized anxiety disorder. So normally they always go, ADHD and anxiety always go hand in hand, but it was a relief to have like a target now. Like, okay, there is something going on. I had no idea, like, because growing up, ADHD used to be the joke, like, oh, you're distracted, oh, squirrel, all that stuff. And then you come to find out that there is so much. And the idea of being like inattentive or the idea of having distractibility is just the very tip of the iceberg. And then it ends up being so vast just in ADHD alone that you're like, oh, there's so much more to this. And then all the light bulbs start going off about, my childhood. I'm like, how did nobody see this?
Right. Like, it wasn't the first time this was popping up later in life. It was throughout your whole childhood and then some.
Yeah, it was my entire childhood, going through college. Like, I made it through all these things. It was hard. There was struggle, but like, I never understood why I would struggle so much with certain things. And for me, like, a big problem for me was, I had problem with math, because of, there's dyslexia with numbers and I can never say the actual term because it's like dyscalculia. I always want to say dysdracula, but it's not it. But it basically, when you see number, you will mismanage numbers. So like, if it would be a string of numbers, like, I used to hate getting phone numbers from people because I would always transpose numbers in it. And it's just what my brain does. So I always had problems in math, and I had problems with things that I wasn't interested in. So getting through school was very hard because it was all boring to me. But no one saw those signs until I was diagnosed and started deep diving, doing the research and talking to people and talking to other people that have, for me, it started with ADHD, but then I started talking to other people under this whole umbrella of neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So I always tell people, because it's a word that's thrown around a lot. They're like, "Oh, what's neurodivergence? Is that is that like a medical term?" I'm like, no, it's a catch-all. Because if you want to start going down the list, you have, everyone knows like ADHD, autism, OCD. Those are in there, but there's like 40 different types of isms and like acronyms underneath that umbrella. So most people just say neurodivergence, and it really comes down to just your brain works differently. Neurologically, there's nothing wrong with you. It just works different. And I think that's the stigma a lot of people have is, well, I'm broken. My brain doesn't work. No, it works. It works great. It just doesn't work the same way that a neurotypical person would work. And I'm lucky that my wife is neurotypical, because then you can see the contrast between things. Even in the book itself, like, fast forward a little, when I actually had it published, she got the proof copy and she's like, "I can't read this." I'm like, "Why not?" She's like, "Why'd you space it like this?" I'm like, "It's for people that are dyslexic."
Oh,
And she's like,
wow.
really? I'm like, yeah, if it's double spaced and there's an extra space after each paragraph, when you read it and you have some sort of like reading disability,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to absorb and comprehend a lot easier. I wish growing up I knew that. But now, like, that's why I love my Kindle, because I can do that in my Kindle. So
Yeah.
I can read books again, which I always thought like, oh, I can't read. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's too, I don't remember anything. But I was like, oh my, it's just little things like that
Mm-hmm.
make all the difference. So
Absolutely. So you did feel some relief then once they said, okay, this is what's
yeah,
going on.
yeah. There's a part of ADHD that a lot of people experience, and it's called hyperfixation. So if you know how to use it, you can actually use it to be a superpower. It's for me, I love researching things, even if it's something off topic, but if it catches my interest, I will do it. So when I found my diagnosis, the first thing I did was, okay, let's find out all about ADHD. Let's find out all about the generalized anxiety disorder. And then I saw the parallels between them and how they work together, and then how ADHD works and how certain things work with it, what medications work, what doesn't work. I was like, I went on a deep dive, and that interest in learning about what's affecting me ended up being, it began a new spark of life for me, because at 39 I got my life back. It was that feeling of, I was not sad that for the first 39 of my years of my life I was struggling. I was happy that now I can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I can move forward knowing that, hey, there are going to be roadblocks, but now you're going to have to really, like, look, when you see them, you know how to mitigate them, instead of just hitting them and wondering why you can't get through them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
So,
there's something to be said about when you know something is off or you know something isn't right, you can't put your finger on it, and having somebody say, you know what, you're not wrong. You know, you were onto something. You felt something was off. You were right, and this is what it is. And now you can, like, I mean, obviously you've written this book to help other people, but to figure out what the tools are, like you said, whether it's the spacing of the pages to help different people, but knowing what it is that's, what's going on, and then here's the tools to help you with that. I mean, it's just, I can understand that.
I think that's a big part of why I needed to put the book together. Is I was in New Mexico when I started writing it. I was taking care of my elderly uncle who was going through a spinal surgery. So I was going to be out there for a bit. And we just had a tragedy in the family, and my mother-in-law had passed away. It was a chaotic time. But sitting down, and once I had this info dump, this brain dump of information, sitting down and thinking about all of the tools and all of the little tricks and tips and things that I did throughout those 39 years without knowing, and then with knowing the 3 years after my diagnosis, honing and getting those things to work even better with my mind, I said, this is great. Now the major goal is I want other people to have the shortcut, so they're not struggling for half their life, wondering, why can't I sit down to do something as simple as meditate? How come everyone tells me to write in a journal, but every time I try to, I have a journal that says I'm writing in a journal? I mean, it's all these little things that, and there's a subtitle on the book that it always bugs me, because people would always tell me, oh, come on, it's so easy. It's not. They might be easy for you. They might be easy for most people. But with how our minds work, getting somebody to sit down and be mindful and present in the moment when their mind is going a billion miles an hour and on 1,000 different topics every second, to have them sit there and figure out a way to be present is a mountain of a task. until it isn't, because you can't just say, do it. That's not going to work. You have to break it down to little tiny chunks, 1 or 2 seconds at a time. It's really how I started. And I figured over years to get to a point where I can sit down and I meditate daily now, and at least 10, 15 minutes, upwards of an hour.
Wow.
It's in me now to do that. That's part of me. And I know that going off the path is going to happen, and I don't beat myself up anymore. So if I am in the middle of a meditation and something pulls me out of it, it's okay. I'm just off the path, so I can come back on. It's all those little tools and tricks and tips that I was like, okay, more people need to see this, not just me. That was the big push behind me doing it. And that's when I tell people that I was able to put together a book, write it, and get it out there and purchasable in under 8 months. People are like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. I mean, it's not War and Peace. It's the overview of 3 simple topics: mental tools, physical tools, and social tools. I don't go ultra in depth yet. I'm already following those books up. I have outlines done, but to write more books, because I just feel called to do it now, because I know there's so much more that people can do. But I was able to put together a book with not even just over 100 pages, just more than 5,000 words. Because most people will go, oh yeah, you wrote a book, and it'll be like an ebook that's 20 pages and it's out there. I'm like, no, this is a full book. There's almost 200
substantial
pages. Yeah, there's
more than
almost
that.
200 pages of words. It's double spaced, because it has to be. If it wasn't, it probably would have actually been better for me if it wasn't, only because it costs less to print. It's important that other people are out there learning the shortcuts, especially for their minds.
Yeah, and it's so good that you are talking about this, because I still get messages from people on older podcast episodes where I've had guests come on and talk about living with bipolar disorder, living with other mental illness, or struggling with whatever it might be. And it's like, wow, those episodes came out months ago. And I still get messages where people say, thank you so much, because this has been so enlightening. So I just know already, as we're recording this, there's messages that are coming. I just know it. And people will obviously be able to follow you too. But it's so helpful to have these conversations, because I'm sure there's so many people, just like you said. I mean, you think about our generation, where it was thrown around as an adjective. Oh yeah, you have ADHD, or, it was used so loosely, if you couldn't focus, or if you were this, or if you were that. And it just, and even back then you think about, if you went to a therapist or if you went to a psychiatrist, you were considered crazy. It wasn't a healthy thing. So, I'm sure there's a lot of people around our age, between probably 35, 45 years old, who are struggling with different things. And, and again, maybe went through similar experiences in their childhood. And, if they could, maybe get confirmation from a provider or a doctor, might help them. And same with your book. So let's talk a little bit about that. Tell us, you've already kind of touched on what neurodivergence is. You kind of said it's like an umbrella, but will you just kind of shed a little bit more light on that?
Yeah. Like I said, it's a word that gets thrown around a lot now, especially I would say in the last year, it's really become more prevalent, because people are finding out that there is a lot to people that are neurologically different. So the terms neurodivergent, neurodiverse, those are the big catch-all terms for people that have a neurological disorder of some sort, because people don't like using the word disorder. It never bothered me. It's one of those things where that's what it is. Can't help it. Unless, I guess OCD would be not so much a disorder, it's in the name, because everything has to be very ordered then.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
But
I didn't
that
think of
goes
it that way.
yeah, that goes the same with ADHD is attention deficit disorder, and the problem isn't so much a deficit of attention. The problem is we have too much attention, so we will give attention to things that are really interesting to us because somebody that has ADHD, our brains are dopamine starved. They're deprived. Like, we don't produce dopamine in the same way because people will call it like the reward chemical. And it's not so much a reward chemical as it is a chemical that will coax you along to your reward. So an average neurotypical person will know that if they get the big task done, they will get X, whether it's a compensation or praise or whatever it is. They know at the finish line there's a big thing there. And so that will drive them to get to the end. And that's what dopamine will do for them. And for somebody with ADHD, what dopamine does, it's great. And we will chase it in whatever we do. The problem is we'll chase it to a point where it's depleted. So if doing that task makes somebody else that's neurotypical, make them feel great.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it might feel great once, but it won't feel great the second time. It won't feel as great. And the third time, it might not feel great at all. There might be no motivation behind it. There might be no inkling or joy from it. So your brain goes, yeah, but you know what would give you some joy? Maybe if you just have some sugar, because sugar is going to spike dopamine. And then your brain's going to trick your stomach into saying, oh, you should have a donut. Actually, you should have a dozen donuts. And you're like, wait, where's this coming from? You're like, well, this is easier because this is quicker dopamine. And then you're like, why am I doing that? Well, yeah, but maybe on the way to get donuts, you should probably speed to get there because you need that. You should have some little adrenaline and take a little more risk. And you just start doing things that are outside the norm, impulsive, that can cause these big dopamine spikes because your regulation of dopamine just isn't there. And it is a huge factor in everything you do. Because when you don't have a lot of dopamine, it causes depression. It causes a million negative side effects. So you're always chasing dopamine no matter what. So people with ADHD, you'll see they'll get addicted to things that give dopamine. So it can be things like something as simple as their phone. Phones are, I hate the phone so much because those apps are time sucks. They will suck every second of your life.
Yep.
But it's just dopamine. You just scroll forever on it and you just get it. That's why they become little black holes. But they also get addicted to, food, drugs. There's a million different things that if it's going to give you that dopamine hit, you're going to chase it. But on the flip side, there's a strange thing with ADHD that I kind of learned over time, especially after being diagnosed, as like stimulants in ADHD, like caffeine, even on like things like, well, sugar is not so much a stimulant as it is, that's just a drug in and of itself. But even like drugs and things that do stimulate your central nervous system, they don't have the same reaction. Like people will ask me all the time, like, how could you drink an espresso and then go to sleep? Because it doesn't affect my brain that way. I don't get wired. It actually almost has a calming effect. And hence why the medication that I used to be on with Adderall, people are just like, wow, that's like meth. It's so close to it. It's so, that's an actual drug. I'm like, yeah, but if you take it, you're going to be wired. You're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to do a million things. And for me, it calmed me down. It actually slowed my brain down, which is such a strange thing. And I've read a few books about it. And I've listened to podcasts, I've watched seminars, and it's so strange how we both have a brain, but they're just wired completely different.
Yep, absolutely. And as you were saying, it was interesting because I was thinking about when you were talking about whether you're, whether it's the donut or it's the cell phone, I was thinking it's like you're always chasing a high,
Mm-hmm.
And then that next high, as I say, and this is not with, I'm not trying to compare drugs with this, but I guess it's probably a bad comparison, but, you try to get that high and it's not, you get so much out of it and then you try to chase it again. It's not as great as the first one. And then the third high is not as great as the second or the first one. And it's never the same. And I was thinking that, and then you confirmed it.
Yeah. And that is exactly it. And that is a good comparison because it is. People will say, oh, you're chasing the dragon. It's the dopamine dragon in this case, because you're always trying to find that thing that's going to give you the most dopamine. But the problem is our brains are going to find the easiest way to get it. And just because it's an easy way to get it doesn't mean it's a healthy way to get it. It doesn't mean that it's a safe way to get it. It doesn't mean that it's a conducive way to get it. It's just that you get it. So for some people, it might be, I used to play video games to an extent that it would be alarming. Like I could sit there for 18, 19 hours in a row playing a game because it's constantly feeding me dopamine. It's a thing there's like numbers and flashing lights and all these things happening. My brain loves it. But where some people are like, well, that's great, but what about, other things in life that you could be doing? I'm like, yeah, but that will be there until my brain stops. Even if I love the game or love whatever it is, there's going to be a point where I'm going to play it and my brain's just going to go, this is not doing it anymore. We need something else. Mm-hmm. And it comes and goes in everything, even in our hyperfixations. We might go all in, and this is something my wife came to know, is we see something, get really interested in it. We might even buy a bunch of stuff for it. Maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's a new career choice, and then 2 weeks later, we never do it again. We never even look at the equipment that we bought, and it's over. And everyone goes, wait, I thought you were just talking about how amazing this was, and you were so involved in like collecting stamps, and you got all these books and did all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, well, now I don't care.
Yeah, you're over it.
My brain's just, I get nothing out of it. So on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. That's a scary realization where I actually thought, like, photography. Thankfully, I found passions in life. I'm really thankful. Like, photography is a passion that I have, that no matter what, even if I stop for a month or two, if I don't go out and have a shoot or I don't book clients, and then I pick up the camera and I go back out, it's there. I still have that love because it's a passion. And that's really important for a neurodivergent person, is if you do find your passion in life, I mean, unless it's like highly illegal, then maybe not. But if you find your passion in life, you have to go for it because your brain is wired for whatever that is. It is so important because I found the passion and love in, like, I always loved art and creating, but photography was always, it became this thing where I truly fell in love with it. And the passion for writing was always there too. I just never realized that it could be a thing. Like I have tons of little old marble composition notebooks just full of little stories or ideas, but it was doing the research and writing and putting together my thoughts about something that is important to me. And that is because I live it every day.
Mm-hmm. You're the expert.
Yeah. And it felt weird to say it, but yeah, I'm an expert in it because I live it.
Mm-hmm. You have 39 years of experience.
Yeah. of undiagnosed experience. And then, then throw 3 years of now like educated experience on top of it. Yeah, it's but yeah, like I said, it is so important that when somebody is under that neurodivergent umbrella and they find that passion that they're really, they can't get enough of, and even if somebody takes them away from it and they just want to go back to it, like, it's there for a reason. And it might be your outlet to get just to get whatever's in your head out, or might be your place to decompress, or it might be your new career. You never know. But like once you find that spark there, it's hard to let it go.
Now, let me ask you this though. Like, let's just say somebody, is dealing with this, but they have that interest in the stamp collection, as you mentioned. Like, how do they know if is this just another thing that I'm going to get over in 2 weeks, or is this a real passion that's going to stick around, like your photography business? Like, can they stop themselves before it's too late?
That is a good question. Now, stopping yourself before it's too late might not happen a few times. You're going to spend money on, even if you don't have it, you'll spend money on something, on your new fixation. But there's something that you will find that has been woven throughout your life, and whether you realize it or not, sometimes you might see it in, if you get into meditation. I always tell everyone meditation is the best medication on earth. Once you can figure, especially with ADHD, once you can figure out the initial hiccups of it, sometimes it's through there that you realize this thing has been with you your whole life and you didn't notice it. I didn't become a photographer. I was always into art, creating things, having a vision of something. And the only time I ever touched a camera was in high school. It was a film camera with a dark room, and I did it for like half of a school year. But there was something about it that kept with me for nearly 20 years until I picked up a camera again and really went for it. Because I have this to thank, I have iHeart to thank for this. If I had never been asked to photograph a live performance, I probably would have never dove in to get a camera for my personal growth, because it was taking photographs of a live performance that we had in studio that triggered something in my brain that said, hey, this was the thing that you loved, and you always love really interesting photos. And it was like this amalgamation of an entire lifetime of like, yeah, why did you never go back to this? You loved this in high school. You had all of a sudden these clear, vivid memories of doing all this stuff. And I was like, why didn't I do this? Why did I go into graphic design? Why did I do all this stuff surrounding photography, but I never actually did photography? And then that's when it was clear as day. That's how you kind of really know it. I know a lot of people will probably sit there and go, well, yeah, but the hyperfixation thing happens, and you get really interested in the thing for a couple of weeks and then it's gone. I'm like, there's a different feeling. It's parallel to it, but you could feel it growing. And what happens on a hyperfixation is you'll get stuck on it and you'll really enjoy it. But I don't feel connected to it like I do when I pick up a camera. I think that's why I never want to discourage people from going down the path of their hyperfixations, because sometimes they will stumble upon it. And when you stumble upon something that you love like that, and then it sticks. I have a friend that he left his corporate job, this would be 20 years ago, and he was scared. But what he found is his hyperfixation with his OCD was organizing books. So he was selling used books because he loved organizing books.
No kidding.
Of all the things. And so he would go to like libraries and places that would sell giant like bins of books for pennies each, get them all, catalog them, and then sell them online. This was obviously before times have made it easier with Amazon and such. But even he found that hyperfixation, and he did that for years until it got to a point where he sold the business off and he just went off to do other things. And I was like,
wow.
He made a lot of money.
Isn't
But
that wild?
that's the thing, is he kept nagging at him. Like, this is something you love doing. Let's explore it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think that's important too, because especially as we kind of go through different phases of life, our interests do change, but if there's something that's a common thread that's there, and I love that he quit his corporate job. That's one of my favorite. I love stories like that of when people take that big risk and say, you know what, there's something that's pulling me in a different direction. I want to do something different. And that's scary, and that's kind of what you did. I mean, you've now rebranded yourself, you've rebranded your podcast, but to write a book, I mean, again, a lot of people talk about, I'm going to write a book and, or I should, whatever, but you did it in 8 months, but you wrote a book, published it, did all the things. So what is the name of your book?
The name is Tools for Navigating Neurodivergence. And Navigating Neurodivergence is, I think it's a twofold name for me. First, it's what I had to do growing up. I didn't know I had something, but I had to navigate when things didn't work for me. I had to figure out ways to get through. And then, taking from the radio days, there's something about alliteration when you have two words that begin with the same letter. It always sounds good. Mm-hmm. But it just reminded me, I'm like, yeah, that is something that when I say it, I feel it. And navigating neurodivergence is something that is what I'm about, what I want to help people with. And that's why the whole rebrand of everything. My podcast was the Professional Amateur Podcast, which was something I threw out the wall, and it stuck because of my love and passion for things, and then hearing about other people's passions. What I started realizing is talking to a lot of my friends that I had on there and a lot of acquaintances is all these creative people that found their passions in life, they're all neurodivergent people. Every single one of them.
Mm-hmm. How about that?
I started laughing. I went back and I did one of those things where I'm like, all right, let me just start checking off all the guests that I had. I was like, oh, my best friend, Brad. Yes. Definitely. I mean, I grew up with him. We both know we have same types of issues. And I started checking off every single person was like, okay, yeah, they had the thing. Like there was these struggles that they had, but when they found their passion, like my one friend who is he's a junior professor at a college in Michigan, and I was like, well, that's interesting. He's like, yeah, but my passion is woodworking and metalworking.
No way.
He makes all these, he makes knives and he makes butcher blocks and he makes all these beautiful things. And I'm like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And he's just like, one day I got really interested in it. And then I said, I want to try to do it. And I did it. I was like, and he's been doing it for 15 years now. And it's not even like a job or anything. It's his creative outlet. Mm-hmm. It's like he works on robotics and crazy stuff in college. And then on this side, he's doing his creativity, and that's his creative outlet of being able to have those moments where he's present and mindful of what he's feeling and doing. And I'm like, yeah, that's his meditation. Yep,
absolutely.
It's beautiful.
Absolutely. I'm completely empathizing with this too. Yeah, that's because, we all have not all of us, but, many of us have a job or something that pays the bills, but that it might not be completely your passion. It's just what helps you pay the bills. And then you have this creative outlet. I mean, that's what I do with my podcast. It's the same thing. There was something that was pulling me to this, and I just needed the little push from you. And then here I am, but it's a creative outlet. It's a way to connect with wonderful people like yourself and hear these stories and, there's so forth. But it's great that it's so interesting how people's passions can be so different than their 9 to 5 because there's something it's creative. And it's like, there's something that's pulling you to do this thing. And then that brings me back to your book. So now, actually, you mentioned this already, that you've done a lot of things within your book to help people in different kind of struggles. Like you said about the double spacing, and you said the dyslexic. And so can you kind of share a little bit more light on that too, of what people can expect in the book?
Yeah. So I laid out the book as simple as I could, because I didn't want to go like I saw a lot of traditional routes of writing a book about kind of like self-help books and all these things. And I was like, I don't want it to read like a clinical book where people are trying to like force this ideology of how things should be done. Because if there's one thing a lot of neurodivergent people have struggled with, is being told that our way doesn't work, even when it does. So we get told constantly, that's not how you're supposed to do it. I was like, but it worked. It worked. So why is my way wrong?
Mm-hmm.
So I approached the book like I was talking to somebody. So it started out very introduction, just talk about, hey, this is kind of what I set out to do. This is why I wrote it. This is my diagnosis, everything I went through. I'm writing it through my eyes, and I'm going to tell you how I got through it. And I tackled it how I tackled the actual things. So for me, people are just like, yeah, do to-do lists to get, free dopamine, use Post-it notes, journaling, and all this. So I was like, before, I always used to-do lists and stuff like that. For me, the mental clarity for a neurological disorder is first and foremost. So learning how to meditate, learning how to be present, learning how to be mindful, and learning breath work. Those things are your mental tools. Even though breath work is kind of physical, it's better for your mental clarity, for anxiety, for depression. So I start there. That's like my base, because I want to get people into the right headspace to get them lowering their anxiety, lowering their frustrations by giving them those little tools so they can get on to the next thing, which physical tools are things like I every day, and I have, I'm holding up, I have these little notepads all over the house in strategic spots that have to-do lists on them to remind me of the things that I need to do in those areas. And that's so important, because a lot of people are like, well, just remember what you have to do. It's like, that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It could be something as simple as like, do the dishes, clean out the fridge. But if I don't have it written down there, I won't. It just won't. It won't even register to do them. So I have those things, and things like Post-it notes. I have Post-it notes everywhere. They're attached to, like, I call them kind of like the important places where I work, and generally where I do my writing. Like, I have two spots where I'll have these Post-it notes as not as like actually, I do have some affirmations too, but that's because I was trying something else. But they are important questions to remind me of important tasks. So if you just put, don't forget to like write 1,000 words today, that does nothing for me. But if I put, did you write 1,000 words today? And I'll think about it, like, wait, no, I didn't. All right, because I need that reminder.
Yeah.
Because the question, if it asks a question for me, it's a complete game changer. It's something at first that you have to get over the anxiety a question might cause for some neurodivergent people, because there are anxieties around being asked questions, even if they are very, like a very non-plus type question. Like, it could be like, hey, what did you get done today? That can drive a person to just lock up in fear. Even if they did 1 million things, their mind will go blank, and their anxiety will go through the roof. It's just how their brain works. That's why I go over the mental tools first, so you can get to the point where you can ask yourself these questions. So once you get through the mental tools and these physical tools of like the Post-it notes and different types of journals that to help you where to put them, how to actually use them. I go to social tools, and a lot of people are like, how do you have social tools? I was like, there are tons out there. Support groups are huge. I am a full fan, as much as I hate social media. There are great social, like Facebook groups to go in. You don't even have to participate. The important thing is you can go in and see that people are asking serious questions, having fun, posting funny memes, doing a million different things. But the important thing is that you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
You're never alone through this. So you don't even have to interact with these groups. You can just be in there to have that reminder. So when it comes up in your feed, or you go, you get a notification from it and you go to it, it's that reminder of, hey, if you have to reach out, you can. But then you also have other tools in that toolbox. You can go, like a therapist is not your enemy. Finding the right therapist might take a few tries.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have that person that you can talk to that is not in your circle, it's a huge weight off your shoulders, because you can freely express your frustrations. You can freely tell them what you're feeling, like your innermost struggles, and they will be an open ear for you, and they'll be able to guide you into ways that you would have never thought yourself. I can't stress enough that if the thought of paying for therapy scares you because you don't have insurance, there are other options out there. You can even do it through some apps. They have it where you can do it through like a FaceTime call. There's so many options, and they're not expensive compared to like paying out of pocket for, some local therapist. All my therapy sessions are done through telehealth. So I sit here just like I am right now talking to you, but my therapist is on the other end.
No kidding.
So
do you find a difference from the in-person, or, I mean, even if you've only done the virtual, but is it still as helpful?
I've done in person too. I say for me, it's just as helpful than doing in person. And I say that for, I feel more comfortable in my office, in my setting. Like I can set the lights how I want. I can relax. I can light incense if that's what I'm feeling. Light some just like relax here.
Mm-hmm.
For me, like to get in the car, even though my therapist is like 4 minutes away, that's still, I got to get in the car. I got to get over there. Got to get into the office. I got to settle in and talk to him. And then I got to get back home. Sometimes when I'm done with therapy, I just want to, all right, I'm just going to relax, and I'll just like turn the lights down, put on some music, and just relax. So I benefit more from the teletherapy. In person is great too, especially if that is what you want, is to be physically in that space. Definitely.
But you make a great point with you're in your own home. So you're as comfortable really as you can be, instead of being in their office, however they have it set up. And it might not feel that comfortable. So at least if you're in your own space, you probably feel a little bit safer. And like you said, when you're done, you can just, go into the other room or go back to whatever it is that you're doing. And there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, it is a really nice shift. And I always tell people, everyone has that one friend that they can talk to, and really, I'm not saying dump on them, but you can just, there's no filter, and you can just be open and honest and vulnerable with them. You always have that one friend. And if you don't, that's all right. That's why the other tools exist. But that one friend is such a good tool, because one, you're probably going to laugh and say a lot of ridiculous stuff with that friend, because you guys will probably have a history of some sort. I know my one buddy, Brad, we can say anything to each other and it's okay.
It's a judgment-free zone.
Exactly. And then we can get super serious about how we're feeling and not be afraid to show our emotions and go through all that. It's a wonderful tool to have, and not everyone will have it. Not everyone, it's rare, and it's really hard, especially in your 40s. It's hard to make friends.
Yeah, right.
been really trying since I moved to Georgia.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. I'm so glad you brought that up. We're going to touch on that in a second, but
Yeah.
finish your thought.
Yeah. So it's so if you do have a friendship that you've had either since high school, even if you only talk to them once a year, that is quite all right, because you'll find with other neurodivergent friends, staying connected is not going to happen, but reconnecting, it will be like no time had passed since your last time you talked. So
I love it.
Having those friends is really good to have.
It's everything. I can't agree more with you. And just to touch on the whole friend thing. So one of my, actually somebody I've never met, social media friend, very big supporter, it goes both ways. And she had just posted something this morning about, how being in her 30s is, why is it so hard to make friends? And she's in her late 30s. And I wrote back right away and I said, oh my God, I feel this so much. Like, it's so true that it's one thing, I think, if you have like kids and they meet other kids and then maybe the parents kind of become friends or whatever. But if you're just an adult in the world, like, I think we could do a whole episode on that. But why is it so dang hard? Right. And I think this is the time where we probably want more friends because we've changed a lot through life. Our paths are kind of changing, who we've become or whatever, we're changing as people. But man, why is that so hard?
I wondered it the entire time because I've been in Georgia for 5 years, and the first 4 years here, I tried to make friends, and I'm acquaintances. I have plenty of acquaintances here. I'm able to talk to my neighbors. We're friendly. I'll watch their house if they're out of town. They'll watch ours. They're great people, but I can't be friends with them because energetically we don't match. Just everything else is off. And that's what I'm realizing. I was like, they have kids. I don't have kids. This is a big thing because I'm in the South now, and they are all about college football. And I could care less about college football. I learned the hard way. You just kind of have to pick a team and go with it and just pretend in these conversations, especially in networking events, because they will literally, it doesn't matter, male, female, does not matter. One of the first questions they will ask, like, are you a Georgia fan? And I'm like, what? I live here. I'm like, that's what my answer was for the first year. And they're like, no, like Georgia State. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Please.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. They're diehard.
Yeah, they are diehard. And it's infused in everything here. But when you do find, like I said, in the last year, I finally found people that I'm more energetically aligned with. And whether it's people that are also into meditation, either they're into metaphysical stuff, they're into like sound healing. I was like, wait, I'm finding people now.
Yes.
And this feels great. And now I can actually say, and one of the artists that I became friends with, she even said, she's like, for years, she had not found any friends, and she was in Maine with her husband, and she moved here last year, and all of a sudden, through one person, we have a small group of friends now. There's like 6 of us.
Oh, I love it.
And we were all in the same boat that for years. It was just like, how do you make friends?
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's like, do you just go up to somebody and be like, well, you seem kind of cool. I kind of like you. Do you want to be friends? Right? I mean, you can do that when you're 5 on the playground, but later in life, it kind of gets creepy.
It does.
And I think we like each other. Let's hang out. Here's my number. Right?
Yeah, that was always the question. Like, how do you approach that? Be like, oh man, you're really cool. Do you want to come? Do you want to come over and hang out?
Exactly. They're be totally creeped out, and they're never going to call me ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. So you're talking about the energies, and not to like, I know we're here to talk about your book and all the great things that you're doing. But like, I've always considered myself an extroverted introvert, and so when it comes to like the whole energy thing, like you're right. I mean, if somebody drains me, like their just personalities are different. If they're super extroverted, it's really hard because I have to really prepare myself for that afternoon with them. And then the whole next day, I'm like, I'm just staying in the house because I'm drained, So it's true. Like you have to find somebody who's like kind of on your wavelength. And I do think like the introverts are starting to come out of the woodwork a little bit more. So that's awesome. But yeah, it's like, it's interesting. You have to find people that kind of like balance you well or understand you or match you, because otherwise, it's a lot of work.
It is. It is a lot of work.
Oh my goodness. I love it. So let me ask you. So we were talking about you were talking about rebranding, and you mentioned your podcast before, how it was called the Professional
Amateur podcast. Yeah.
So you rebranded it.
Yeah. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. Because like I said, I started noticing everyone on the list was neurodivergent in some way. And I talked to, and we found all these things. I was like, they found their passions in their life, no matter what. So I was struggling with the idea of professional amateur was a big moniker in my head, where my blog, everything was the professional amateur. It was basically somebody that might not be the top tier professional, but they have that hunger and thirst of an amateur, but still put a professional product out. And I tried really hard for a couple of years to convince myself that was great, but I was just like, it's not clicking. And once I released the book, all the stars aligned, all of a sudden all the lights turned on, and I went, oh, duh. Navigating Neurodivergence. Of course. That's what I do. So everything got rebranded. So the podcast is now Navigating Neurodivergence with Stefan Glazer, because that's me. That's what I do. And the topic of it, it's more, mental health and neurodivergent centric, but it's still talking to people that have found passions or got through life and how they did it. Because I still want to know how they did it.
Yes.
It's
fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It could be somebody all of a sudden just woke up one day and said, I'm going to have a bee farm. And that's what they did. And oddly enough, I know somebody who did that, and I want to get them on to talk about it. So,
oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah. So, it's strange how so many people, especially those in the neurodivergent, in those that are neurodiverse, they are finding these creative passions, and it doesn't matter if it's their new day job or they don't make any money at all. I want to hear their story. I want to hear, first I want to hear their struggles, because I know having a platform to talk about those is super cathartic.
Yes.
It's why I do solo episodes, just kind of like, all of a sudden I get something in my head. I'm like, all right, I got to talk about it for 20 or 30 minutes just to get it out.
I'm with you on that. Absolutely.
And by the time I'm done, I'm like, it felt good. And then I get messages like, yeah, I didn't realize that's what I was feeling. I'm like, that's perfect.
No kidding. Yeah.
But yeah, that's why. And everything, I was like, I'm just going to rebrand everything to this, because it's me. It's been my life. So that's the way it's going to be.
That's great. I love it. So, and for those that are listening right now, I'm going to have all of Stefan's links in the show notes below. I know I've already mentioned that, but including your book too. So your book, which is Tools for Navigating Neurodivergence, his podcast, Navigating Neurodivergence. And let me ask you, where can people buy this book?
It is available on Amazon for Kindle, hardcover, and paperback. I know some local stores can purchase it. Amazon has I will tell you this, if you are looking to write a book and you're afraid of all the self-publishing outlets out there or all the big publishers out there, I can tell you this, Amazon makes it so much easier, and it doesn't cost you anything to publish a book there.
Huh.
I will tell a short little story here about putting together a photography book that is still in the works, but I shopped it to a few different publishers, and was on many calls. And publishing is not like it used to be. If a publisher really loves your book, that's great. Guess what? Every publisher will really love your book, because you're going to pay to get your book published. And they wanted $35,000 to have a 110 page color photo, like a
Wow.
desktop coffee table photo book. And I kind of sat there for a minute. I'm like, wait, I pay you? I thought
Yeah.
the idea was I pitch my book. You love the idea. You give me an advance. I go out, I shoot the book and get it all put together for you. And then you distribute it. I'm like, oh, no, it doesn't work like that anymore unless you're an established author. I was like,
oh, wow.
And then the self-publishing route seems like a good idea. And it could be. It could be if it's certain types of books, sure, if you want a wide audience. But that also is going to cost about $5,000 to $10,000.
Wow, this is no joke.
For a text-based book, it was a little less, of course, because I was doing a photo book. So it was a high-end photo book. But for text, I went to Amazon. I was like, all right, let's just see what the Amazon distributor thing. I'll get it on Kindle. And then I kind of lucked out. They always had paperback, but they just started doing hardcover. And hardcover has been my biggest seller out of everything. Sold more copies of the hardcover than paperback or Kindle. But I was surprised at many different parts of it. One, how easy it was to set up. Two, they give you everything for free. Three, their printing fees are almost non-existent. It cost me like a few dollars to get a paperback and maybe like $7 or $8 to get a print, just like an author copy of a hardcover. And even some of the bigger publishers were just like, yeah, you have to buy your author cover, copies at like bulk. And here I could just buy like 10, which is a lot more feasible when you're an independent author. And their cut is not that bad. And they have expanded distribution through the US and UK. And so you can actually like go to stores and say like, hey, order my book. And you can pitch it to local bookstores and they can order copies through Amazon at a wholesale rate. So they're really changing the game for authors. So
that's really cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool. I mean, especially to your point of, I mean, just some of those fees. I mean, the $35,000. I mean, that's insane.
And I was talking to the CEO of Brown Publishing. So I was like, this is going to be great because I got lucky. It was going to be pug based and I'm a pug dad. That's how I got published as a photographer. It was because of my pugs. And she was excited. She knew of my pugs, which was even funnier. And I was like, oh, this is great. I have the CEO of Brown Publishing. She's a big deal. She loves animals. This is going to be it was like an hour and a half call. And then, I got to the end of the call and she's like, this is a great idea. Let me send you like some information. And that's when I saw it was not like me getting the money, me paying.
You're like, I'm paying you.
I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh my gosh.
You just wanted to talk about dogs then for an hour and a half.
Oh
That's
my
what
gosh. And what a letdown, right? I mean, because you probably had to be so excited.
Oh I was like through the roof. I was like, this is going to be so great. And getting that email was just like, this is not so great.
It's just not what I thought.
No.
Oh gosh. So let me ask you this. Now you have this book. I mean, it's just so cool. What are you most proud of? Because I've seen a lot of your posts on social media about almost kind of not feeling, you've made some maybe short video clips, maybe they're from your podcast, but it's just about like, almost like having a tough time kind of being proud of this. So
yeah, that's been a reoccurring theme in my life is not being able to celebrate my wins. And not being able to celebrate my wins made the release of the book almost feel hollow at first. And it took time for me to really sit down and sit with it. And what really, my favorite, it wasn't the release of the book. It wasn't the first sale of the book. It wasn't any of that stuff that really got me like excited and celebrating. It was a message from a friend of mine that read her book and made me burst into tears because of how much it was helping her. And she was only like 2 or 3 chapters in.
Oh.
And she's like, this is now like my go-to, like when I need to refocus and get back to center and get back to myself in the moment. Like I already have like all these pages, like, earmarked, and just so I can go back to them whenever I need to. And knowing that I was able to impact somebody and help somebody, that was the thing I was most proud of. So I could sell 1 million copies, but that first feedback of this is really helping me, that was Mount Everest for me. I was like, all right, I did it. It's like, now I can celebrate.
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice. That's really exciting. Well, congratulations on all of that. It's no easy task. And I think that brings us to one of my last questions for you, which was, to rebrand yourself, which you've been doing, to take a risk. Here you are creating this book. You don't know, how many people are going to buy it or how they're going to react to the book, and just trying something new, like kind of like I love how you said how, you love people's stories, because I feel that's the same with me. One of the reasons I have the podcast too is I'm fascinated by people's journey. Yeah. So people might go on one path, but then at some point in life, they want to shift gears, or maybe they haven't yet and they want to, but they feel like they don't have the courage. They're nervous. So do you have any advice for people who would like to kind of follow in your footsteps and be kind of a risk taker and try new things? What would you say to those people?
I will say this, and it goes back to reading The War of Art, which for anyone that has a creative outlet or wants a creative outlet or is thinking about a new path, and doesn't even have to be creative, when you have that resistance, that fear of going into that new thing, you have to lean into it. You have to push into and through that resistance, through that fear, because right on the other side of that, that's your breakthrough, and that is where you want to be. And so if you have that inkling of like, I can't do that because, and then you list a whole bunch of excuses. No. You have to do it, because you can't put up these barriers to the thing that you want to do, that you love, that that, man, if I was just doing that, I'd be happier. Or if you just knew. So everyone that feels that resistance, you have to push through it, no matter how scary it is. It's because when you're up against resistance, you're right there at the edge of a breakthrough. And that's my advice to everyone, not even neurodivergent people. Mm-hmm. It's just, you have to do it, no matter how scary.
Yeah, I like that. So when you feel like you're so close, when you feel that resistance, like you're almost there, don't quit. Just get to the other side of it. Mm-hmm. I love it. Well, Stefan, it has been so wonderful to talk with you. It's been long overdue. So very proud of all your accomplishments. So I know the listeners are going to appreciate everything you shared today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. And I'm proud of you too, because you took the ball and ran with it. I said, just do it. And you just did it.
Well, thank you. And it's been so much fun. I really, I took like a little bit of a digital break. I called it my digital detox over the summer, and I missed being on the podcast so much too. So many things you said about like the solo episodes. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Like this has been my creative outlet, and I have such great listeners, and the feedback has been wonderful. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. No, that's a good indicator right there, is when you walk away to detox from all digital stuff, and then you realize that you're really, really missing the thing that you were doing. That's a good indicator. That's a good indicator right there.
So find your passion, people. That's what we're saying, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Stefan, thank you again for being on the Piece of Me podcast, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Have a good one.
Before you go, I need your help. If you're listening to this show on Apple Podcasts, scroll all the way down and give the Piece of Me podcast a positive rating and review. You can also support the podcast by subscribing to this show on Spotify, Apple, Pandora, or wherever you listen. To stay connected, follow the Piece of Me podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and at the website pieceofmepodcast.com.